The moonlight cast an endless mosaic of shimmering sparks across the snowdrifts. The biting cold gnawed at Max, seeping to his bones through his frozen jacket. He'd lost all feeling in his fingers and toes. His consciousness blurred, heavy eyelids descending like the metal shutters of an abandoned factory gate. "Stay awake!" Max rasped, his iced-over lips struggling to part. "Can't!" Around him, only white wilderness and the wind singing its mournful dirge. The blizzard had finally died down, revealing a boundless sky and a full moon, indifferently observing his agony. This is it, a thought flashed through his mind. His strength had utterly abandoned him. His hand, reaching for the phone in his pocket, fell limply into the snow. His eyelids closed for the last time. A soft rustle made Max's eyes flutter open. On a moonlit ridge she stood, a large gray she-wolf. Beside her, huddled against her flanks, 2 young timber wolves, still gangly with adolescence. Wolves, his muddled mind registered. Just like the ones? The she-wolf stared directly at him with an unblinking gaze. In her amber eyes there was neither fear nor hatred, only wisdom and a knowledge beyond human understanding. "I deserve this," Max thought. "This is my penance. Take me." The wolf pack turned and slowly ascended the ridge, dissolving into the moonlight. Max heard no sound of their paws on the creaking snow, saw no tracks on the perfectly white surface. Like phantoms, time stood still. Then suddenly the silence was shattered by a drawn-out wolf howl, not solitary, but multi-voiced, filled with a harmony of primeval power. From the ridge, where the ghostly visitors had vanished, a real pack descended. Dozens of gray shadows streamed down straight towards the man lying there. The end, Max thought, unable even to reach for his rifle, lying a few feet away. The first wolf trotted up and stopped at his feet. It sniffed, and then, to Max's astonishment, it carefully climbed onto his body and lay across his stomach, pressing its entire frame against him. A second nestled by his chest, a third by his shoulders, a fourth by his head. They surrounded him, a living, breathing blanket of warm fur and rapid breath. Max felt their heat slowly penetrate his clothing, felt the return of sensation to his own body, and with it the unbearable pain of thawing limbs. "They're saving me?" was the last thought that flickered through his mind before merciful darkness claimed him from the world of pain. Before we start, tell us where you're from. Subscribe, like, and watch to the end. Here we go. 15 years ago, Riverton, Wyoming. 13-year-old Max walked quietly along a forest trail following his father. Andrew Miller, a lifelong hunter and angler, was taking his son on his first real hunt. "Remember, Max," his father whispered, raising a hand for the boy to stop. "In the wilderness, we're not masters. We're guests." Max nodded, trying not to breathe too loudly. Excitement surged through him. His first real hunt, his first shot at genuine game. "We don't kill for sport," his father continued, scanning the undergrowth, "only for food or protection, and always with respect for the animal." They had been tracking an elk for 3 hours. His father showed his son tracks, scat, broken branches, teaching him to read the forest's story. Suddenly, a shadow flickered ahead. His father raised his rifle but didn't fire. Instead of an elk, a wolf, a large male with silvery fur, darted into the clearing. It froze, looking at the humans, air whistling from its jaws. "Don't move," his father whispered, barely audible. The wolf and the humans stared at each other for a long minute. Then the predator, as if making a decision, turned away and unhurriedly retreated into the thicket. "Why didn't you shoot?" Max whispered when the wolf disappeared. "We could have gotten a pelt." His father lowered his rifle and shook his head. "He wasn't threatening us, and we didn't come for him. He was just living here. This is his home. Why kill without reason?" Max remembered that lesson for life, or thought he did. 8 years ago, Riverton, Wyoming. Max returned from the funeral feeling empty inside. His father had died suddenly, a heart attack, while ice fishing. They couldn't save him. The house was silent. His mother had gone to stay with her sister in the city, unable to remain in a home full of memories. Max understood her, but he had no intention of leaving. Riverton was his home. He was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset and sipping whiskey straight from the bottle, when his friend Steve's old pickup truck pulled up. "How are you doing?" Steve asked, sitting beside him. "All right," Max lied. They sat in silence for a while. "Heard Ranger Smith caught some poachers yesterday," Steve finally said. "They were trapping wolves and even setting snares for wild boar." "To hell with them," Max replied indifferently. "What do I care now?" Steve looked at his friend intently. "What would your dad have said?" Max turned sharply, about to snap back, but stopped himself. His father's image, and that wolf in the forest, flashed before his eyes. "Sorry," he mumbled, turning away. "It's just hard." "I get it," Steve nodded. "But remember what Mr. Miller said. He taught me a lot, too." But with time, his father's lessons began to fade. Hard work, meager wages, meeting Sarah, marriage, the birth of their son, Kyle. Life swept Max along, carrying him further and further from the values his father had instilled in him. 6 years ago, Riverton, Wyoming. The loud roar of an engine shattered Riverton's morning stillness. A massive black SUV, its chrome glittering, slowly cruised down the main and only paved street in town. "There goes Severoff, showing off again," Steve grumbled, taking a drag from his cheap cigarette. "Been here 3 months, and he's already strutting like a peacock." Max Miller nodded silently, watching the vehicle pass. Arthur Severoff had appeared in their forgotten little town at the start of spring, bought out the derelict ranch, began acquiring land, hiring locals. For many, it was a lifeline. There was hardly any work in Riverton. People scraped by with odd jobs and homesteading. "Well," Max shrugged, "he pays on time, brought in new equipment. At least the guys are bringing some money home now." "And you're joining them," Steve spat on the ground. "Are you going to kiss his ring, too?" "Got to feed the family," Max replied simply. "Kyle's starting school soon. Sarah's struggling alone, working for peanuts at the general store." Steve grunted, but said nothing. He didn't want to lose a friend over some rich city slicker. The next day, Max stood at the gates of the former ranch office, clutching his worn cap. The security guard, not a local, brought in by Severoff from the city, gave him a sharp look. "For Mr. Severoff? What's it regarding?" "Work," Max replied curtly. Inside the building, everything had changed beyond recognition. Instead of peeling paint, there was fresh decor, new furniture, computers. A young woman with perfect makeup, another city type, sat at the reception desk. Severoff received him in the spacious office that had once belonged to the ranch foreman. In 20 years, Max had been in here only a couple of times, but he remembered the old setup: a rickety desk, a sagging sofa, cracked plaster on the walls. Now the office looked like something out of a magazine. Miller, Maxwell Andrew. Severoff didn't even look up from his papers. 38 years old, high school education, general laborer, married, one child. Max blinked in surprise. How did Severoff know so much about him? "That's right," was all he said. Arthur Severoff finally looked up. His cold gray eyes critically swept over Max. "I need hard-working people," he said. "No bad habits, and with their heads screwed on straight. They say you're a good hunter." "I go into the woods sometimes," Max shrugged. "Excellent." Severoff smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm hiring you. You'll be doing various things, from wrangling to security patrols. Salary of $1,500 a month, plus a bonus for hitting targets." For Riverton, that was good money. "Agreed," Max nodded. "Good." Severoff handed him a folder of papers. "Sign here and here, tomorrow at 6 a.m. at the ranch." When Max left the office, he had a strange feeling, both relief and a vague unease. But he pushed the doubts away. The main thing was stable income. The first few months passed relatively calmly. Max worked on the ranch, helping to repair enclosures, herd cattle. Severoff proved to be a demanding but fair boss. He tolerated no laziness or sloppiness, but he also paid on time. Life in Riverton changed. Many men got jobs with Severoff, some on the ranch, some in the fields, some at the sawmill, which the businessman had also bought and modernized. The general store started stocking products that hadn't been available before, and some families even began renovating their homes. In the evenings, returning home, Max saw how his wife had changed. Sarah, always gloomy from fatigue and constant financial strain, now smiled more often. New things appeared in the house: a washing machine, a microwave, a flat-screen TV, small joys that had been out of reach before. "I bought Kyle a new coat," she announced proudly one evening, "and winter boots, and a hat." Max smiled, seeing her happy eyes. "That's great." He kissed his wife's cheek. "I'm thinking of starting to save for a car. A used one, maybe. It'd be easier to get to work." "Do you think we can afford it?" Sarah asked doubtfully. "With Severoff's bonuses, absolutely." Max nodded confidently. "He says he's going to expand the property. Clear those thickets by the western field, put up more corrals." "What thickets?" Sarah asked again. "Isn't that protected woodland?" Max waved it off. "Severoff has everything covered. Permits, papers, it's all there." He didn't notice the change in his wife's face. Sarah used to work in the county office and knew well that the western part of the forest was indeed protected. It contained dens of rare animals, including wolves. "See?" Max told Steve as they sat on the porch of the Miller's home one evening. "You can have your cake and eat it, too." Steve stubbornly shook his head. "I don't trust him. He didn't come here for nothing. Why would a rich city guy want our backwoods?" "Maybe he's expanding," Max shrugged. "Land's cheap here. People are hard-working." "Mark my words, Max." Steve stubbed out his cigarette on the railing. "He's going to bring trouble." At that moment, their 5-year-old son, Kyle, ran past the house, chasing the neighbor's puppy. "Dad, look!" the boy shouted, pointing at the fluffy dog. "Can we keep him? He's the only one left. The others found homes already." Max exchanged a glance with Sarah, who had come out of the house at the commotion. "Are you ready to take care of him?" his father asked seriously. "Feed him, walk him, clean up after him?" "Yes." Kyle nodded eagerly. "I'll be the best owner, honest." Well, if Mom doesn't mind. Sarah smiled, looking at her son's beaming face. All right, take your friend, but not in the house. He gets a doghouse in the yard. Kyle, with a joyful yelp, rushed to hug his parents, then ran off to catch the puppy, who had already darted towards the neighbor's yard. There you go, Steve laughed. Now you got a dog, too. Look closely. Maybe it's a wolf cub. Everyone laughed, but Max heard something prophetic in his friend's words. Trouble came in late July. First, a sheep disappeared from the far paddock, then another. Severov called a meeting. "We have a problem," he announced gloomily. "5 head have gone missing in the last week. Tracks point to wolves." The men exchanged glances. Wolves had always roamed the surrounding forests, but they usually didn't come close to the town. "We need to organize a patrol," someone suggested from the back rows. "Already have," Severov cut in. "But it's not enough. We need to eliminate the problem." He paused and swept his gaze over the assembled men. "I'm offering a bounty for every wolf killed. $500 a head." A surprised murmur rippled through the crowd. For the locals, that was a lot of money. "And furthermore," Severov raised a hand, "whoever brings in the most wolf pelts in a month will get a bonus. 5,000. After the meeting, the men lingered, discussing the news. Even those who had never hunted before were fired up by the idea. "It's a gold mine," Paul, Max's neighbor, exclaimed enthusiastically. "Knock down a dozen wolves. There's your house repairs and schooling for the kids." Max kept silent. He'd hunted since childhood, but never for money. Protecting livestock, feeding his family, that was different. The image of his father, his lesson about the wolf in the forest, flashed through his mind, but Max pushed the thought away. "What about you, Max?" asked Victor, another friend. "Are you in with us?" Max looked at his home, where his wife and son awaited. Kyle needed a new uniform for school, winter clothes. Sarah had been talking about the broken washing machine for a month. "I'm in," he nodded. "Just need to prep my rifle." At home during dinner, Max told Sarah about Severov's decision and his participation in the hunt. 500 a head, Sarah whistled. "Wow, you could make more in a month than your regular job." "That's what I'm thinking," Max nodded, serving himself potatoes. "Even if I get 5 wolves, that's 2,500 already." "And if you get the most, there's a bonus, too," Sarah murmured thoughtfully. "We could—" "Dad, are wolves bad, right?" Kyle suddenly asked, until then silently poking at his plate. Max stumbled. He remembered his father's words, "We don't kill for sport, only for food or protection, and always with respect for the animal." "There," he began, then fell silent, not knowing what to say. "They're pests," Sarah said instead of him. "They kill livestock, attack people." "Attack people?" Kyle asked, frightened. "Can they attack me, too?" "No, no," Max said quickly. "Wolves don't bother people in our parts, but they do harm the farms. They kill sheep, calves. We have to protect our livestock." Kyle nodded seriously, accepting the explanation. But Max caught a strange look from his wife, as if she wanted to say something else, but held back. "What?" he asked when they were alone. "Nothing," Sarah shook her head. "Just, you'll earn money, of course, but—" "But what?" "You used to say, like your father, that you shouldn't kill without reason, and now—" "There is a reason," Max frowned. "Protecting the livestock." "Yes," Sarah nodded. "Of course." But something in her tone made Max feel a pang of conscience. However, he quickly dismissed the feeling. The wolf hunt quickly turned into a competitive frenzy. The men divided into two teams, one led by Steve, the other by Paul. Max joined Steve, along with Victor and two young guys recently back from the army. On the first day, luck favored Paul's team. They bagged 7 wolves against Steve's 3. In the evening, both teams gathered at the local tavern to celebrate the start of the Golden Wolf Rush, as Paul had dubbed it. To a new source of income, Paul declared, raising his glass, to wolf money. Everyone drank heartily, except Max. He looked at the happy, flushed faces of his neighbors and felt a strange emptiness inside. "This is just the beginning," Victor said, pouring another round. "I heard there's a whole den in the western woods. We'll head there tomorrow. We'll be carrying their heads out in sacks." "Hey, that's our territory," Paul jovially protested. "No fair?" "And who said it would be fair?" Victor laughed. "It's war." Max finished his drink and quietly left the bar. Outside, it was cool, smelling of summer herbs and distant thunder. He lit a cigarette, slowly exhaling smoke and gazing at the stars. "Not having fun?" a voice asked from behind. Max turned around. Ranger Smith, the old game warden who had kept his distance from the wolf rush, approached him. "Just thinking," Max replied vaguely. "Folks are happy." "I reckon so," Ranger Smith grunted. "Easy money. But let me tell you something. If there are no wolves, there won't be any of you either." "How's that?" Max frowned. "Nature's like a clock. Take out one gear and everything stops. Wolves keep the wild hogs and deer in check. No wolves. The hogs will wreck the woods. Then the harvest will be worse. Then you get the idea." Max was silent for a moment, pondering the old man's words. "Come on, Ranger," he finally said. "We won't kill them all. Just thin them out a bit." The warden shook his head. "I hope so. But you've tasted blood now. You killed 10 today. Tomorrow you'll want 20. And the day after, 30. Won't feel like enough." With that, he clapped Max on the shoulder and walked away, leaving him alone with his troubled thoughts. "We'll catch up," Steve grimly promised the next morning when the team gathered at his yard. "We need to leave at dawn and head north to the old logging clearings. There should be a den there." Max nodded. The thrill of the hunt had captivated him too, not so much for the money, but for the competitive spirit. He diligently ignored the inner voice, so much like his father's. The morning was cold and foggy. Steve's team set out in the dark before sunrise. They walked in silence, listening to the sounds of the forest. Victor spotted the first wolf. A gray shadow flitted between the trees. Max raised his rifle, aimed, and smoothly squeezed the trigger. The shot ripped through the morning silence. The wolf twitched and collapsed onto the grass. "Got him," Steve nodded approvingly. "First one down." Something inside Max faltered as he approached the dead animal, a large male with silvery gray fur, just like the one his father had spared years ago. Its open eyes seemed to stare directly into Max's soul, asking a silent question. Why? "What are you standing around for?" Steve called out. "Let's go." By noon, they had bagged 3 more. The hunters grew increasingly excited. Max felt a strange mix of emotions, pride at his accurate shots and some vague unease. "Break time," Steve commanded when the sun was directly overhead. Time for a bite. They settled near a large boulder, beneath which was a small cave. The place looked cozy and sheltered. Victor took a thermos of tea from his backpack, Steve some sandwiches. Max leaned his rifle against a tree trunk and stretched out his legs with pleasure. But there wasn't the satisfaction he'd expected to feel. 4 dead wolves, $2,000, a good day. Why did his heart feel so heavy? "Do you hear that?" One of the young guys, Anton, suddenly tensed up. Everyone froze. A low growl emanated from beneath the rock. "Wolf!" Steve exhaled. Max slowly reached for his rifle, but didn't manage to grab it. A gray muzzle with bared fangs emerged from under the boulder. A she-wolf, large, with dulled fur, came into the light and paused, looking at the humans. Something about her behavior was wrong, strange. Wolves usually avoided humans, retreated at the slightest noise. This one stood still, as if protecting something. Max finally grabbed his rifle and, without thinking, fired. The buckshot hit the she-wolf in the head. She twitched and fell onto her side, her paws kicking. "4th one down," Steve exclaimed. "Great shot, Max." The hunters returned to their meal, excitedly discussing the she-wolf's strange behavior. Only Max remained silent, looking at the motionless body. Something scratched at him from within, some memory, a lesson long forgotten. "All right," Steve finished his tea. "Time to move on. We'll take this one and go." Max nodded and walked towards the dead she-wolf. And then he heard a sound that shouldn't have been there, a soft whimpering. He carefully peered under the boulder and froze. In the darkness of the cave, 3 tiny bundles stirred, wolf pups no older than a month. They nuzzled their faces into their mother's cooling body, trying to find her teats. The world around Max seemed to stop. He watched as the puppies, still blind, with soft fur and trembling paws, tried to drink milk from their dead mother. He saw their helplessness, their despair, their incomprehension, and suddenly, before him, arose the image of his own son, Kyle, just as vulnerable, needing protection. What would become of him if his parent suddenly disappeared from his life? Who would care for him, feed him, protect him? "Hey, Max, what are you stuck on?" Steve called out, approaching closer. Max didn't have time to answer. A shot rang out, and one of the wolf pups twitched, going limp beside its mother's body. A second shot, and another pup went still. "Stop!" Max cried, but it was too late. "Got 3 with 1 shot." Victor grunted contentedly, reloading his rifle. "The little ones count too. 3 times 5, 1,500, clear profit. Money. Blood money. That's what the hunt, which his father had taught him to respect, had turned into." Max rushed to the cave. One wolf pup was still weakly stirring. He carefully picked it up. The tiny body fit in his palm. The pup was warm, alive, whimpering softly from pain and fear. Max looked into the wolf pup's small, still closed eyes and felt something inside him break. The pup weakly twitched, licked his hand with a hot tongue, and then fell silent. 2 tiny tears welled from beneath its closed eyelids. At that moment, all the excuses Max had created for himself crumbled. Not livestock protection, not feeding his family. Pure greed for easy money was driving all of them to slaughter. "What have you done?" Max cried out, getting to his feet. "These are just babies. You killed babies." Steve looked at him in bewilderment. "What's wrong, Max?" "They're wolves. Pests." "Babies," Max repeated, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "They're innocent. What's the difference, human or wolf? All babies are the same." He gently placed the dead wolf pup next to its mother and the other pups. His hands trembled. The image of Kyle, playing with the puppy in their yard, stood before his eyes. "What are you?" Victor began but didn't finish. Max, with a fury he didn't know he possessed, lunged at him, Knocking the rifle from his hands, they tumbled to the ground. Max hit blindly, not caring where his blows landed. The scene flashed before his eyes, the dead she-wolf and 3 tiny bodies beside her. "Are you crazy?" Victor shouted, trying to defend himself. "Over some lousy wolf pups?" "They're not lousy!" Max roared, delivering blow after blow. "They just wanted to live." Steve and the other hunters pulled him off, holding his arms. "Calm down, Max," Steve shouted. "Calm down, damn you!" Max went limp in their hands, breathing heavily. He looked at the dead wolves, and a black emptiness grew in his soul. "Pick them up," Victor said, rubbing his split lip, "and let's go." "Don't touch them," Max said quietly but firmly. "Don't you dare touch them." Something in his voice made the other hunters back away. "Suit yourself," Steve shrugged. "Stay with them if you want. We're leaving." They left, carrying the wolves they had killed earlier. Max remained alone, looking at the dead family. His mind was blank, his hands moving as if of their own accord. He found a spot under an old spruce tree, dug a shallow grave, and carefully carried the bodies there. First the she-wolf, then the pups, laying them next to her, huddled against their mother's side as they had been in life. "Forgive me," he whispered, covering the grave with earth. "Forgive us." When the grave was ready, Max sat beside it. Tears, which he hadn't shed since his father's death, streamed down his cheeks. He remembered all of his father's lessons, all his teachings about life, about nature, about killing only out of necessity, and always with respect. "I forgot, Dad," he whispered, looking at the sky. "I forgot everything you taught me. Forgive me." He returned at dusk, alone, without any game. Only emptiness filled his soul. Max arrived home late that evening. Sarah met him at the door, worried. "Where have you been? Steve came back ages ago. Said you stayed in the woods alone." Max silently kicked off his boots, walked into the kitchen, and slumped heavily into a chair. His hands still smelled of forest earth and wolf fur. "What happened?" Sarah sat opposite him, looking intently at his face. Max looked up. How could he explain what had happened? How could he convey the horror and self-loathing he felt? "I'm not going on a wolf hunt again," he simply said. Sarah was silent, waiting for him to continue. "We killed a she-wolf and 3 cubs," Max slowly said. "I saw the pups die. They were like children, helpless." He fell silent, unable to continue. Sarah unexpectedly came over and hugged him, pressing his head to her chest. "I understand," she said softly. "And I'm glad." "Glad?" Max asked, surprised. "That you understood." She knelt beside him, looking him in the eye. "I didn't want to say anything, but I always feared this hunt would change you, make you different." Max took a deep breath. "I completely forgot my father's lessons, and he always said that sometimes not killing takes more courage than killing," Sarah finished for him. "You used to tell me that often, before." They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. From the children's room came Kyle's sleepy voice. "Mom, did Dad come back?" "Yes, honey," Sarah replied. "Go back to sleep." But the boy had already emerged from the room, rubbing his eyes sleepily. He walked over to his father and climbed onto his lap. "Dad, you look sad," he said, touching Max's cheek. "Were you crying?" Max hugged his son, holding him close. "A little, son. Adults cry sometimes, too." "Why?" Max exchanged a glance with Sarah. How could he explain to a 5-year-old what he himself was only just beginning to understand? "Sometimes we do things we later regret," Max slowly said, and that makes us sad." "You'll understand when you're older," Sarah added, stroking their son's head. But Kyle frowned, clearly not satisfied with that explanation. "Is it because of the wolves?" he suddenly asked. "Aunt Sarah told me you were killing wolves today." Max swallowed the lump in his throat. "Yes, son, because of the wolves." "Were they bad?" Max was silent for a long time before answering. "No, Kyle, they weren't bad. They were just living in the forest, their own lives, raising their young. It was us. I acted badly." Kyle thought about it, processing the information. "But everyone says wolves are pests." "People often say that," Max nodded. "But you know what my dad, your grandpa, used to say? He said there are no bad animals in nature, only hungry ones. And every animal has a right to live." "Even wolves?" "Even wolves," Max confirmed. Kyle nodded seriously. "Then I won't kill them when I grow up either." Max smiled through his welling tears. "That's right, son. Very right." That night, he had his first dream about wolves. He saw the she-wolf, the very one he had killed. She stood on a moonlit ridge, looking at him without hatred, without malice, only with a kind of wise understanding. Max woke up in a cold sweat. Dawn was breaking outside. He quietly got up, trying not to wake Sarah, and went out onto the porch. The morning air was fresh and clean, early birds singing in the distance. Life went on, but something in him had changed forever. Severov was not pleased with Max's decision to quit hunting. "Miller, do you understand that you're letting the team down?" he asked coldly, summoning Max to the office. "We've declared war on these pests, and you're deserting us." "I have my reasons," Max replied stubbornly. "What reasons could there be?" Severov tapped irritably with a pen on the table. "You don't need money. Don't need to feed your family." Max was silent, not knowing what to say. How could he explain to this man what had happened to him in the woods, and would he even want to listen? Unexpectedly, the secretary, a young woman, entered the office without knocking. "Mr. Severov, Mr. Thompson is on the line, says it's urgent." Severov frowned. "Excuse me, Miller, business calls. Tell you what, think about it for a couple more days. The hunt continues, the bonus is still on." "I've already decided," Max said firmly. "I'll work." He looked away, avoiding his boss's piercing gaze. "On the ranch, in the fields, wherever you need me, but not on the hunt." Severov studied him for a few long seconds, then nodded. "All right, I'll transfer you to the farm, but be warned, the pay is less there." "I understand." "And, Miller," Severov added, as Max was at the door, "don't even think about turning others against the hunt." "That's an order." Max nodded and left the office. Strangely, he felt a sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. In the reception area, he bumped into Alice, Ranger Smith's younger daughter. The young woman worked in the county administration and rarely came to Riverton. "Max?" she said, surprised. "Hi, long time no see." "Hi, Alice," Max smiled. "Are you here to see Severov?" "Yes, about some parkland issues," she nodded. "Listen, they say there's a full-blown war on wolves here?" Max's face darkened. "There was, but I'm not part of it anymore." Alice looked at him intently. "Good, because—" She looked around and lowered her voice. "My father and I suspect the wolves aren't to blame." "Not to blame for what?" "For the missing livestock. My father found strange tracks near the western edge of the ranch. Wolf tracks, but too perfect, as if deliberately left." Max frowned. You mean that? Someone is deliberately tarnishing the wolves' reputation, Alice finished. My father's checking, but he's almost sure, and I think I know why. Why? The western lands. Alice lowered her voice again. Severov wants to develop them, but he can't as long as they're a protected zone. If wolves are declared dangerous pests, the protected status could be lifted. You get it? Max stared at the young woman, stunned. Steve's words about trouble coming suddenly took on new meaning. Do you have proof? He finally asked. Not yet. Alice shook her head. But we're looking, and it would be great if you kept an eye out, too. I'll think about it. Max nodded. Thanks. Alice squeezed his hand. My dad will be glad. And I'm proud of you for refusing the hunt. Max nodded and walked out of the office with a heavy heart. If Alice and Ranger Smith were right, then they weren't just killing innocent wolves. They were part of some dirty scheme. At home, the conversation was even harder than Max expected. Sarah didn't share his calm about his reduced earnings. Max, are you out of your mind? She fumed. Where did this sudden love for wolves come from? They're butchering our livestock. Maybe it wasn't them, Max mumbled, remembering his conversation with Alice. What? Sarah didn't understand. Never mind. I can't kill them anymore, not after what I saw. And what are we supposed to live on? Sarah threw up her hands. Kyle needs school clothes. My hours at the store have been cut. I'll work, Max stubbornly repeated. I'll pick up more shifts, fish more. We'll get by. For heaven's sake, Sarah snapped, just don't come complaining when we run short of money. She stormed into the kitchen, slamming the door. Max sat in the room, dejected and confused. He understood his wife. After years of constant struggle, a chance to earn money to provide for their family had come, and now he himself was turning it down. Suddenly, Kyle walked into the room with the puppy in his arms. Dad, Lucky seems sick, the boy said worriedly. He's coughing and doesn't want to play. Max called his son over. Let me see. The puppy indeed looked listless. His nose was dry and hot. Looks like a cold, Max said. We need to take him to the vet. There's no vet in Riverton, Kyle reminded him. Only in the county seat. Max thought for a moment. The county seat was 20 miles away. The bus ran once a day in the morning. They wouldn't make it today. You know what? He said, getting up. We'll take a taxi. I'll make that money back tomorrow. Really? Kyle's face lit up. And will Mom let us go? I'll talk to her, Max nodded. You don't abandon friends in need. When he explained the situation to Sarah, she only shook her head. You're willing to spend money on a dog, but not earn it by hunting wolves? It's different, Max argued. The puppy's family and wolves are also someone's children. Sarah suddenly nodded knowingly. Just a different family. Max looked at his wife in surprise. She sighed. Go ahead, of course. I understand everything, Max. It's hard to make ends meet, you know. I know. He walked over and hugged her. I'll still provide for you all, I promise. Just not that way. That evening, he and Kyle took the puppy to the vet in the county seat. The diagnosis turned out to be nothing serious, a cold and mild dehydration. The doctor prescribed antibiotics and vitamins and gave Max some useful tips on caring for a young dog. As they were driving home, Kyle suddenly asked, Dad, do wolves get sick too, like Lucky? Of course, Max nodded. They're animals, just like dogs, only wild. And who helps them when they're sick? Max thought about it. In the wild, the sick often die. But wolves are social animals. The pack takes care of its members. Like our family? Yes, Max smiled. Like our family. And if a wolf pup gets sick, does its wolf mother help it? The scene replayed before Max's eyes. The dead she-wolf and 3 helpless bodies next to her. He swallowed the lump in his throat. She helps, of course, if she can. And if the wolf mother is killed, will the pups die? Most likely, Max replied quietly, if they're very young. Kyle was silent for a long time, pondering what he had heard. Finally, he said, "So, hunters kill not only wolves, but their children too." It wasn't a question. Max looked at his son, surprised by his reasoning. "Sometimes that's how it is," he answered carefully. "That's wrong," Kyle said firmly, clutching the puppy to his chest. "If you and Mom weren't here, who would help Lucky?" "No one," Max answered honestly. "Or someone else, maybe." "I don't want wolf pups to be killed," the boy said seriously. "They haven't done anything wrong." Max looked at his son, and pride flooded his heart. This 5-year-old boy understood what many adult men in their town either couldn't or wouldn't understand. "You're right, son," he said, hugging him. "They really haven't done anything wrong." The wolf hunt continued without him. Almost every day, one of the men brought Severov new trophies. The bounty flowed into the village. People bought appliances, made renovations, some even acquired used cars. But Max worked on the farm, tending the livestock, mending fences. He only went into the forest for mushrooms and berries. When he accidentally came across wolf tracks, he gave them a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of respect. A few days after his conversation with Alice, he met Ranger Smith on the outskirts of town. The old warden seemed to be waiting for him. "Howdy, Max." The ranger nodded. "Come with me. I want to show you something." They went deeper into the woods, following a barely visible trail. Ranger Smith moved easily despite his age. Max could barely keep up. "Where are we going?" Max asked when they had walked about 2 miles. "To the western perimeter," the ranger called over his shoulder, "where the sheep were taken." They came to the farm's perimeter fence, a long line of barbed wire strung between posts. Ranger Smith knelt at one section and pointed to the ground. "Look." Max bent down. On the damp earth were tracks, wolf paws distinct as if stamped. "Well, a wolf passed through." Max shrugged. "So what?" "This," Ranger Smith picked up something small from the ground. "Is that a real wolf? Doesn't leave tracks made of plaster casts." He handed Max a piece of hardened plaster, shaped like a wolf's paw. "A fake," Max said in disbelief. "But why?" "I told you." Ranger Smith straightened up, grunting. "If there are no wolves, there won't be any of you. Someone really wants us to wipe out all the wolves." "Severov," Max said quietly. "Alice told me about the western lands." "My daughter's right." The ranger nodded. "He wants to build his mansion here. Hunting grounds, private estate, the works. And for that, the conservation status needs to be lifted. And how do you lift it? Right. Prove that wolves are dangerous predators and must be exterminated." "And the sheep? Were they really disappearing?" "Of course," Ranger Smith grunted. "Only the wolves weren't taking them. They were being secretly taken to the slaughterhouse and then reported missing. Blamed on the wolves." Max stood, stunned. All this time, they had been pawns in someone's dirty game. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We only have this cast?" "For starters," Ranger Smith put the cast in his pocket, "we'll gather all the evidence. Then we'll go to the authorities." I have a friend in the state attorney's office. Ranger Smith squinted shrewdly. A nature conservation enthusiast and an anti-corruption crusader. He'll give Severov such a hard time, he won't know what hit him. Aren't you scared? Max asked. Severov isn't just anybody, and he seems to have serious connections. I am, the ranger simply replied. But if you're afraid, why even live? I'm an old man. I have nothing left to lose. But you should think about it. Family, a child. Max was silent, looking at the fragment of the plaster cast in Ranger Smith's hand. The wolf pups, their tiny bodies huddled against their dead mother, appeared before his eyes again. I'm with you, he said firmly. What needs to be done? Ranger Smith nodded approvingly. For starters, keep working as usual, but keep your eyes and ears open, especially on the ranch. If you notice anything strange, come straight to me. What if Severov suspects something? Be careful, Ranger Smith clapped him on the shoulder. And remember, it's two of us, and he has the whole town at his beck and call. Keep a low profile. On the way back, Max thought about the predicament he had gotten himself into. On one hand, Severov had indeed helped the town, provided jobs, raised the standard of living. On the other, if he was covertly using people to exterminate wolves for his own gain. Max clenched his fists. No, this could not be forgiven. In the following weeks, Max, as Ranger Smith advised, worked on the farm and watched everything closely. At first he noticed nothing suspicious, just routine, tending to livestock, repairing equipment. But one day, staying late, he noticed an unmarked van pull up to the ranch. Two burly men in camouflage climbed out and headed to the far paddock where the sheep were kept. Max, trying to remain unnoticed, followed them, keeping to the shadows of the outbuildings. The men quickly and skillfully picked out several large sheep, loaded them into the van, and drove off. It took no more than 15 minutes. The next morning, Max wasn't surprised to hear from the foreman that several more sheep had gone missing, and it was clearly the wolves' fault. Looks like we're not wiping them out fast enough. The foreman shook his head. Severov says we need to step up the hunt. Max said nothing, but that evening he went to Ranger Smith to tell him what he had seen. Aha! The ranger nodded with satisfaction after hearing him out. Caught red-handed. Now to find out where they're taking the sheep. I remembered the license plate, Max said. White van, no markings, plate. He recited the numbers, and Ranger Smith wrote them down in a worn notebook. Excellent. The ranger closed his notebook. Alice will check the database. Soon we'll have the full picture. I think I saw one of those guys before. Max frowned. Can't remember where. You'll remember. Tell me. Ranger Smith nodded. And for now, keep observing. Just be careful. If Severov suspects something, it won't be good. I'll be careful, Max promised. But fate had other plans. Returning from Ranger Smith's, he decided to cut through the woods and unexpectedly stumbled upon a hunting party. Paul and 4 other men from the town were dragging the carcasses of killed wolves. "Oh, Max," Paul called out. "Look what a haul! Wiped out a whole den today." Max stopped, barely suppressing his revulsion. They were carrying at least a dozen wolf bodies, including young ones. "Congratulations," he said dryly, and tried to bypass the group. "What, jealous?" Paul smirked. "Don't you want to earn some more?" "No, thanks." "You've gone soft, Max." Paul shook his head. "Used to be a real man, and now, what happened to you, huh?" Max didn't have time to answer. Severov's massive SUV appeared from behind the trees. The car stopped, and the owner himself got out. "Rich haul?" Severov nodded approvingly, surveying the bounty. "Well done, especially you, Paul. Look, you'll earn enough for a new vehicle by winter." "Doing my best, Mr. Severov," Paul beamed. "And what are you doing here, Miller?" Severov suddenly asked, noticing Max. "Didn't you say you quit hunting?" "I'm just heading home," Max replied. "Was at Ranger Smith's." "With the old game warden?" A wary note entered Severov's voice. "Why?" "Lucky got sick," Max said quickly. "My son's puppy. Ranger Smith knows about dogs. Gave me some herbal remedy." Severov stared at him intently, as if trying to ascertain if he was telling the truth. "I see," he finally said. "Give the old man my regards. By the way," he turned to the hunters, "I heard he's against what we're doing. Claims we're unjustly exterminating wolves." "What's to listen to him for?" Paul waved him off. "Old fool?" "Maybe he is a fool," Severov nodded. "And maybe not. Keep an eye out for him." Max stood, trying not to betray his anxiety. It seemed Severov suspected something. "All right, let's go." Severov waved off the hunters. "Load up your kill. I'll give you a ride." When they left, Max slowly walked home, lost in heavy thought. It seemed their little investigation was starting to attract unwanted attention. The next day, Max didn't find Ranger Smith at home. The old ranger hadn't been seen in town for 2 days, which was completely unlike him. Max started to worry. "Haven't seen Ranger Smith?" he asked Steve, meeting him at the general store. "No," Steve shook his head, "but I heard he had a fight with Severov, right in the office in front of everyone. Was shouting something about wolves, about illegality." Max felt a chill within. And then what? Severov told his security to escort him out. Steve shrugged. "Haven't seen him since. Maybe he went somewhere." Max rushed home and immediately dialed Alice's number. She didn't answer for a long time, and when she finally picked up, her voice sounded agitated. "Max, I was just about to call you. Have you seen my father?" "No, I'm calling to find out the same thing," he replied. "Steve says he had a fight with Severov." "Yes," Alice confirmed grimly. "Dad found a link between the van you saw and a slaughterhouse in a neighboring county. He went there, and they confirmed that meat is indeed regularly supplied from there, but then it turned out the slaughterhouse belongs to Severov's brother. Dad took this evidence straight to Severov, wanted to force him to confess." "Insane," Max exhaled. "And now what?" "I don't know." Alice's voice trembled. "I called hospitals, the sheriff's department. He's not anywhere. I'm heading home. I'll be there in an hour." "I'll meet you," Max said, "and we'll figure something out." He hung up and pondered. What to do? If something had happened to Ranger Smith, he and Alice might be next. On the other hand, if they just laid low and did nothing, Severov would win. The wolves would be exterminated, the protected zone lifted, and he would get his land. Max stood up decisively. No, this couldn't stand. They had to act. First, they needed to find Ranger Smith, and for that, he got dressed and left the house. Evening was falling, but it was still light enough. Max headed to the edge of the town where the forest began. At the old, long-abandoned sawmill, he spotted Severov's familiar SUV. What was he doing here? Max approached cautiously, trying to remain unnoticed. Voices drifted from behind the partially ruined building. Max stealthily circled the sawmill and peered into a broken window. Inside, in the dusty premises of the former workshop, stood Severov and 2 of his security guards. Opposite them, tied to a chair, sat Ranger Smith. The old warden's face was bloody, but he sat upright, looking at Severov with unconcealed contempt. "Last time I'm asking," Severov said, leaning towards Ranger Smith. "Who else knows?" "Everyone will know," the ranger replied hoarsely. "Sooner or later, Art, everyone will know, and they won't pat you on the head for it." Severov struck Ranger Smith across the face. "You think I'm scared? I've got everything covered, in the county, in the state. Do you know how much money is riding on this land? Millions! You're nobody, old man. No one will miss you." "My daughter will," Ranger Smith sneered. "And we'll find your daughter, too," Severov promised coldly. "And your friend Miller. Helping the red puppy, you say?" He laughed. "Well, look at how well he learned to lie. I knew he was lying all along." Max felt a chill. Severov knew. He had to warn Alice immediately and call the sheriff. But first, he had to get Ranger Smith out. He carefully backed away from the window and looked around. How could he help the ranger? Alone against 3 strong men, 2 of whom were likely armed, he stood no chance. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He pulled out his phone and dialed Alice's number. "Are you close?" he whispered when she answered. "Just approaching the turnoff for Riverton," Alice said. "What's wrong?" "I found your father," Max said quickly. "He's at the old sawmill with Severov and his security. They beat him." "Oh, my God!" Alice exclaimed. "I'm calling the police." "Wait," Max stopped her. "Severov has everything covered there. They won't help. Do you have a dash cam in your car?" "Yes," Alice confirmed. "I always have it on." "Perfect. Drive to the sawmill, but don't go in. Leave the dash cam recording, and then call this number." He dictated the phone number of his friend who worked for a state newspaper. "Tell him everything, but ask him to hold off on publishing until we get your father out." "What are you going to do?" Alice asked anxiously. "I have a plan," Max said. "The main thing is for you to be safe." He hung up and began cautiously circling the building, looking for another entrance. A risky, but the only possible plan had already formed in his mind. Severov was losing patience. The old man was a tough nut to crack. He wouldn't admit who else he had told about his suspicions. "All right," the businessman finally said, turning away. "Clearly, you won't do this the easy way. We'll have to do it the hard way." He nodded to one of the guards, who drew a pistol. "Last chance, old man." Severov turned back to Ranger Smith. "Who else knows?" "Go to hell," the ranger replied calmly. "No, you're the one going now. Straight there." At that moment, the roar of an engine sounded from outside. Severov flinched and looked out the window. "What the—" he began, but didn't finish. A huge boulder flew into the sawmill window, shattering the already fragile frame. Immediately after, a roaring ATV burst through the opening, with Max at the controls. He steered the machine directly at the armed guard, knocking him off his feet. The second guard rushed at Max, but Max had already leaped off the ATV and struck the attacker with a crowbar. Severov, recovering from the shock, reached for his belt, where he surely had a weapon, but Max was faster. He sprang at the businessman and hit him squarely on the arm with the crowbar. There was a crunch, and Severov howled in pain. "You're a dead man, Miller," he croaked, clutching his broken arm. Max ignored the threat and rushed to Ranger Smith, quickly cutting the ropes with a folding knife. "Can you walk?" he asked, helping the ranger to his feet. "I can," the old man nodded, getting up with difficulty. "You're a wild one, though." "You can tell me how wild I am later," Max supported him by the arm. "Alice is waiting outside." They headed for the exit, but their path was blocked by the first guard, who had recovered from the ATV collision. A pistol gleamed in his hand. "Stop!" he commanded. "Both of you!" "Shoot them!" Severov rasped, getting up from the floor. "Kill them!" The guard took aim, and Max covered Ranger Smith, bracing for the worst. But no shot came. Instead, uniformed officers burst into the sawmill. "Sheriff's Department! Everyone on the ground!" A commanding voice rang out. The guard hesitated, and that was his mistake. One of the officers knocked the weapon from his hand with a precise strike. "What's going on?" Severov asked, bewildered. "I'm the county commissioner. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer interrupted him, a stocky, middle-aged man with a major's insignia. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." Max watched in amazement as Severov and his guards were handcuffed. "How did you know?" he asked the approaching major. "An anonymous tip," he replied. "And something else." He pointed to an officer who was recording everything with a camera. "Live feed to state headquarters, so Mr. Severov's local connections won't help him today." Max looked into the corner of the room where the officer with the camera now stood and saw a small drone with a news channel's logo there. He smiled, guessing who had sent it. "Let's go, old man," he said to Ranger Smith. "You need a doctor, and your daughter's worried." They left the sawmill where Alice was already waiting. She rushed to her father, hugging him with tears of relief. "It's all right, honey." Ranger Smith patted her back. "This crazy one," he nodded at Max, "scattered everyone like kindling." "How did you manage it?" Alice asked when the initial emotions subsided. "I remembered Paul bragging about his new ATV." Max shrugged. "He keeps it in the shed behind his house, and I knew where the keys were. And your call to your journalist friend worked like a charm." "Not just the journalist," Alice smiled through her tears. "I called State Police Headquarters, my old classmate. He's a division chief there now." "And I thought only Severov had connections," Max laughed. "Everyone has their own," Ranger Smith winked. "All right, let's get out of here. I want to wash off this blood and have a strong drink." "Hospital first," Alice said firmly. "No arguments." Ranger Smith sighed, but didn't argue. The three of them got into Alice's car and drove away, leaving behind the sawmill with the police and the arrested criminals. News that Severov had been arrested for assaulting Ranger Smith, fabricating evidence of wolf attacks and illegal land deals spread through Riverton instantly. People gathered in groups, discussing what had happened, unable to believe that a man many considered the town's savior had turned out to be a common swindler. Max became a hero against his will. The story of how he single-handedly rescued the game warden from certain death grew with new details with every retelling. "They say he single-handedly took down 5 security guards," women whispered at the general store. "Heard he crashed through the sawmill wall in a getaway vehicle like a movie scene." Men nodded to each other. Max just waved away questions and congratulations. What mattered to him was something else. The wolf hunt had stopped. The State Wildlife Service, alerted by journalists and activists, had taken strict control of protecting wolves and other wild animals around Riverton. A couple of days after Severov's arrest, Paul came to Max's house. He looked embarrassed and confused. "Listen, Max," he began, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I wanted to apologize for all the teasing for the wolves. You were right. We just blindly followed Severov." Max nodded, accepting the apology. "It's all right, Paul. You didn't know. No one knew." "Yeah, but—" Paul looked up at him. "How did you figure it out? Why did you stop hunting?" Max thought for a moment. How to explain the epiphany he had experienced looking at the dying wolf pup? "You know," he finally said, "sometimes you just need to see the consequences of your actions. Truly, see them." "So, what do we do now?" Paul sighed. "Severov's in jail, but how do we live? There won't be any work again." "There will be," Max said confidently. "The county office called today. They're sending a commission to sort out Severov's businesses. The enterprises will continue to operate, but under state supervision now. And also," he smiled, "Ranger Smith says they want to develop ecotourism. People will come to see nature, to see the wolves. Someone needs to drive them, feed them, house them." "Sounds good." Paul brightened. "So, we won't be out of work?" "We won't," Max confirmed. "Only now we'll protect nature, not destroy it." "Agreed." Paul nodded seriously. "Enough with the hunting." Days passed. Life in Riverton gradually returned to normal. The county commission straightened out Severov's affairs, and, as Max had promised, jobs remained. Moreover, new opportunities arose with the development of ecotourism. Ranger Smith, now recovered from his beating, became the chief tour guide. His stories about the forest and its inhabitants delighted tourists. Alice returned to the town and took charge of organizing the tourism center. Paul and other former hunters retrained as guides. Max continued to work on the ranch, but now he had a new responsibility. He became Ranger Smith's assistant in nature conservation. Together, they developed tourist routes, monitored the state of the forest and its inhabitants. One day, while checking trail cameras in the western part of the forest, they came across wolf tracks. "Look at this!" Ranger Smith pointed to a print. "A female, large, and not alone." Max looked closely and saw small paw prints next to the adult she-wolf's track, grown-up wolf pups. "They're coming back," he said softly. "Life finds a way." Ranger Smith nodded. "After everything we put them through, they still return." Max looked at the tracks and thought about the she-wolf and her pups that had forever changed his life. Perhaps, somewhere in the forest depths, their spirits had found peace, seeing their kin roam freely once again in their native lands. "Come on," Ranger Smith called him. "Let's not disturb them." They silently moved away, leaving the wolf family alone with the forest, their home, their domain, which humans had promised not to violate again. Dreams of the she-wolf on the ridge still came to Max, but now they brought no anxiety. Now they were dreams of peace and forgiveness. December was snowy and cold. Work in the forest decreased. Tourists preferred warmer seasons. But Max still regularly checked trail cameras and monitored the condition of the animals. For Christmas, he wanted to please his son with a gift and also buy something for Sarah. The money from his regular job was only enough for modest presents, so Max decided to go hunting, not for wolves, of course, but for game, of which there was plenty in the forest. "I'm going hunting," Max said at breakfast. "Might get a deer or an elk." Sarah nodded, not looking up from her plate. "Go. Just be careful out there. They say a blizzard's coming." Max packed his backpack, checked his rifle, and dressed warmly. Kyle, now 9 years old, watched his father with a worried expression. "Dad, you really don't kill wolves anymore, do you?" he suddenly asked. Max smiled. "Of course not. I promised you." "But what if they attack you?" Wolves don't attack people without a reason, Max explained, especially now when they have enough food in the forest. The game wardens are keeping an eye on that. Kyle nodded, reassured. "Come back soon," he said, hugging his father. "I will," Max promised, ruffling his son's hair. The forest greeted him with silence and calm. Snow crunched underfoot. Trees stood, wrapped in white cloaks. Max walked slowly, carefully peering at the tracks in the snow. Rabbit trails, marten tracks, bird prints, but no deer, no elk. He went deeper into the forest, stopping occasionally to check his map and compass. After the incident with Severov, Max had become much more cautious and prepared. Now he always carried a full set of equipment for the winter forest: compass, map, lighter, spare food, thermos with hot tea, a small first aid kit, and even a flare gun for emergencies. Ranger Smith had taught him well over the years. "There are no trifles in the forest," the old warden used to say. "Be ready for anything, and then perhaps nothing will happen." By noon, the sky had clouded over. The wind picked up, bringing with it stinging snowflakes. Max grew worried. The weather forecast had predicted a blizzard only by evening, but it seemed the storm was approaching faster. He had almost decided to turn back when he noticed fresh elk tracks, large prints leading to a small clearing ahead. The hunter's thrill overtook caution. Just 30 more minutes, Max thought. I'll get the elk and head straight back. Max cautiously followed the trail, rifle ready. The snow underfoot grew deeper, making progress increasingly difficult. Shouldn't have gone this far, a thought flashed. In a small clearing surrounded by pines, he finally saw his quarry, a large elk, peacefully stripping bark from a young tree. The animal stood sideways to him, presenting a perfect target. Max silently raised his rifle, aimed, and at that moment a gust of wind swept through with such force that Max staggered, throwing off his aim. The elk lifted its head, sensing danger, and with a single leap vanished into the forest. Missed, Max thought with annoyance, lowering his rifle, but annoyance quickly gave way to anxiety. The wind wasn't dying down. On the contrary, it was intensifying with each passing minute. The sky was completely covered with clouds, snow falling like a wall. The very blizzard that was supposed to arrive only in the evening had begun. I have to go back immediately, Max decided. He checked his compass, determined the direction to the town, and quickly began to walk, pushing against the wind and deep snow. But the blizzard intensified with frightening speed. Soon, visibility dropped to a few feet. The wind howled like a pack of hungry wolves, snow blinding his eyes. Max tried to follow his own tracks, but they vanished under the fresh snow with each passing minute. Every step became increasingly difficult. The cold seeped through his clothes, crept to his bones, chewed at his body. His gloved fingers went numb. His cheeks and nose burned from the icy air. "Keep going, Max," he muttered to himself, continuing to walk aimlessly. "Keep going." Time dissolved in the white chaos. 2 hours, 3, 5, he didn't know. His strength waned with every step. His legs became heavy, clumsy. He could no longer feel his toes. Max tried to get his phone, but there was no signal, as he had feared. Here, deep in the forest, there was no reception even in good weather. When he fell the first time, he found the strength to get up. After the second fall, his limbs barely obeyed him. After the third, he remained lying, realizing he couldn't get up again. How foolish, Max thought. Survived all those scrapes, and now I'll freeze in the forest because of my own carelessness." He rolled onto his back, looking into the white void. The past flashed before his eyes like frames from a film reel. His father, teaching him to respect the forest and its inhabitants, meeting Sarah at the town festival, Kyle's birth, that fateful day with the she-wolf, the fight with Severov in the sawmill. "Sarah, Kyle," he whispered, looking into the white emptiness. "Forgive me." The storm gradually subsided, as if it had fulfilled its task, to trap the man. The sky cleared, revealing the stars and a full moon. The light reflected off the snow, creating an ethereal glow. And then he saw them, a she-wolf and 2 grown wolf pups on the ridge, just like in his dreams. They stood motionless, looking directly at him. The moonlight silvered their gray coats. Hallucinations, Max thought, but the vision didn't disappear. The she-wolf looked directly at him, as if evaluating whether he was worthy of help. "I deserve this," Max whispered. "This is my penance. Take me if you want." The wolf pack turned and slowly ascended the ridge, dissolving into the moonlight. Max heard no sound of their paws on the creaking snow, saw no tracks on the perfectly white surface. "Goodbye," he thought, closing his eyes. A strange calm spread through his body. If this was death, it wasn't as terrifying as it seemed. Time stood still. Then suddenly the silence was shattered by a drawn-out wolf howl, not solitary, but multi-voiced, filled with the harmony of primeval power. From the ridge where the ghostly visitors had vanished, a real pack descended. Dozens of gray shadows streamed down, straight towards the man lying there. Max watched the approaching wolves, feeling no fear. Even if they tore him apart, it would be quicker and more merciful than slowly freezing. The first wolf trotted up and stopped at his feet, a gray female, large, with streaks of white on her muzzle. She carefully examined the man, sniffing him, and then, to Max's astonishment, she carefully climbed onto his body and lay across his stomach, pressing her entire frame against him. A second wolf nestled by his chest, a third by his shoulders, a fourth by his head. They surrounded him, a living, breathing blanket of warm fur and rapid breath. Max felt their heat slowly penetrate his clothing, felt the return of sensation to his own body, and with it the unbearable pain of thawing limbs. "They're saving me," a thought flashed through his mind, before the pain became unbearable and consciousness mercifully left him. Consciousness returned to Max with a jolt, as if someone had pulled him out of a deep well. He opened his eyes and immediately squeezed them shut against the bright sunlight. "He's alive!" he heard a familiar voice. "Hey, he's awake!" Max painfully opened his eyes and saw Ranger Smith leaning over him. Beside him stood Paul, Victor, and several other men from the search party. All looked at him with astonishment and relief. "How?" Max began hoarsely and coughed. His throat was parched, his lips cracked. "Easy, easy." Ranger Smith supported his head, offering a sip of water from a flask. "No rush. Do you know what a miracle happened today?" Max slowly looked around. He was lying in the same spot where he had lost consciousness. Around him, a snowy plain, gleaming under the morning sun, and tracks. Dozens, hundreds of wolf tracks all around him. "The wolves," he whispered. They kept me warm." Ranger Smith and the other men exchanged skeptical glances. "We set out to find you at dawn," Ranger Smith said. "Thought we'd only find a body. Then we see A man lying there covered in snow and wolf tracks all around, as if an entire pack had been circling here all night. At first, we thought they'd gotten you. Then we looked. You were breathing. A real miracle, Paul shook his head, or some kind of magic. Max smiled weakly, though every movement was difficult. Sharp pain pierced his arms and legs. His frost-bitten limbs were thawing, and it was agonizing. "They saved me," he said softly, "warmed me all night with their bodies." "But why?" Victor asked, bewildered. "Why didn't they touch you?" Max remembered the she-wolf on the ridge, her wise gaze. Who was she? The spirit of the very she-wolf he had killed 6 years ago, or just another forest inhabitant? Did it matter? "Maybe they remember kindness," he finally said softly, "or forgive wrongdoing. Or maybe they just follow some wolf laws of their own that we don't understand." "You're a lucky man," Ranger Smith said, helping him sit up. "With frostbite like that, you could have lost fingers, your nose, your ears. But as it is, your hands took a beating, of course, but I think you'll make a full recovery." Max looked at his hands. His fingers were swollen, his skin red and peeling, but the worst seemed to have passed. "Help me up," he asked. "I want to go home. Sarah must be worried sick." The men carefully helped him up. His legs were weak, but held him. Ranger Smith and Paul stood on either side, supporting him by the arms. "You know what's most amazing?" Ranger Smith asked as they slowly trudged towards the town. "You were lying here in the middle of an open space, but the snow barely covered you, even though the blizzard was awful. It's like the wolves covered me, not just from the cold, but from the snow too," Max finished. "Guardian wolves," Victor suddenly said. "My grandma used to say people believed if you save a wolf, it will protect you all your life, or its kin will protect you if the wolf itself dies." "And you did protect them?" Ranger Smith nodded. "Not directly, of course, but if it weren't for you, for your investigation, Severov would have wiped out all the wolves in the area." Max said nothing, but a warm feeling spread through his chest, replacing the pain of the frostbite. Perhaps it was the wolves' gratitude, perhaps a coincidence, or perhaps in the forest there truly are laws older and wiser than human ones. News of Max's second miraculous rescue spread through Riverton even faster than the sawmill story. This time, people openly called him the Wolf Brother or the Wolf Man. Some even claimed to have seen him speaking to woodland creatures in their own language. Max just waved off these exaggerations. At the hospital, where he was taken immediately after his return, doctors confirmed, without the warmth of the wolves' bodies, he would not have survived that night. The frostbite was serious, but not life-threatening. He was expected to make a full recovery in a few weeks. Sarah didn't leave his bedside, changing his bandages and helping him with food. She saw her husband's rescue as a true miracle and even began attending the local church, something she had never done before. "You know," she said one day when they were alone, "I keep thinking about that story with the wolf pups. Do you remember you told me how you buried them?" "I remember," Max nodded. "How could I forget? Back then, I didn't believe that wolves could be, well, like people, that they have feelings, memory, gratitude. I thought you were just being soft. But now—" She fell silent, looking out the window, where soft snow was falling. "And now I think maybe they really are a bit like us. Or rather, we're like them. After all, we are animals, just with speech and reason." Max smiled, squeezing his wife's hand with his healthy one. You know what my father would say, that the difference between man and beast isn't in reason or speech, but in the ability to choose. A beast follows instinct. A man can choose who he wants to be. And you chose to be a friend to the wolves, Sarah smiled. And they chose to save me, Max nodded, though they could have torn me apart or just walked past. So they have a choice too, Sarah said thoughtfully. It seems so, Max agreed. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, and Kyle peeked into the room. The boy cautiously approached the bed, holding something behind his back. Dad, I brought you a drawing, he said, pulling out a sheet of paper. Look! The drawing depicted a man lying in the snow, surrounded by wolves huddled against his body. A huge moon hung over the entire scene, and on the ridge stood a solitary she-wolf, as if watching what was happening. Beautiful! Max nodded approvingly. Very beautiful, son. The teacher said it was just a fairy tale, Kyle frowned, that wolves can't save a person, but it's not a fairy tale, is it? Not a fairy tale, Max confirmed, but sometimes truth is stranger than any fiction. Can I come to the forest with you? The boy unexpectedly asked. I want to see wolves. Not now, of course, but when you're better. Max exchanged a glance with Sarah. Not long ago she would have strictly forbidden such an idea, but now, after everything that had happened, she merely shrugged vaguely. You can, Max nodded. In spring, when it gets warmer. We'll take a camera, we'll photograph the animals. Just promise that you'll always listen to me in the forest. I promise, Kyle exclaimed happily. Spring came early, bringing with it warmth, birdsong, and new life. Max had fully recovered from his frostbite and returned to work. The tourist season promised to be successful. News of the Wolf Man attracted many curious visitors from nearby cities and even from abroad. One warm summer evening in early May, when the forest was already covered in delicate green, Max kept his promise and took his son for a walk. They set out early in the morning, when the dew had not yet dried on the grass, and the air was clean and fresh. Remember, Max instructed as they walked along the forest trail, in the forest you need to speak softly, move carefully, and always listen and observe. Kyle nodded, trying to tread as quietly as possible. In his hands he held a small camera, ready to capture anything interesting they might encounter. They spent several hours in the forest, and the boy was delighted by every little thing, from an ant hill as tall as himself to elk tracks on the damp earth. Max patiently explained everything he knew, happy with his son's curiosity. But they didn't see any wolves. They're very cautious, Max explained to a disappointed Kyle. They rarely show themselves to people. But they showed themselves to you, the boy stubbornly retorted. They even saved you. That was a special situation, Max smiled. I don't think that will happen again, and honestly, I wouldn't want it to. He rubbed his hands, remembering the pain of frostbite. They were about to head back when Kyle suddenly froze, staring straight ahead. Dad, he whispered, pointing. Look. Max looked in the indicated direction and froze. On the edge of the forest, no more than 50 yards away, stood a she-wolf, large gray with streaks of white on her muzzle. Beside her, 2 young wolves frolicked, no longer pups, but not yet adults. It's her, Max exhaled. The very one. The she-wolf seemed to hear him. She raised her head and looked directly at them. There was no fear in her eyes, no aggression, only calm recognition. Take a picture, Max whispered to his son, but no flash. Kyle raised the camera and carefully pressed the button. A soft click sounded. The she-wolf blinked, as if confirming she had noticed their action, then unhurriedly turned and disappeared into the forest. The young wolves followed her. "Did she save you?" Kyle asked excitedly when the wolves were out of sight. "I think so," Max nodded, still not quite believing his eyes. "Or someone from her pack. Did she remember us?" "Perhaps," Max smiled. "Wolves are very smart, and they have excellent memories." "I'll call her guardian," Kyle said determinedly. "Can I?" "I think she'd like that," Max nodded. They stood for a while longer at the edge of the forest, but the wolves didn't reappear. Finally, Max gently touched his son's shoulder. "Time to go home. Mom will be worried." On the way back, Kyle didn't stop talking about meeting the wolves, how beautiful they were, and how unlike the terrifying predators from fairy tales. "You know, Dad," he said suddenly, as they approached the edge of the town, "I think I'll be like Grandpa and like you. I'll protect the forest and the wolves." Max smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. The chain hadn't been broken. Grandpa taught his father taught his son, and he, perhaps, would teach his children. And so it would continue. The story of how important it is to respect all living things, how necessary it is to protect nature, how sometimes forgiveness and compassion prove stronger than revenge and cruelty. And somewhere deep in the forest, among ancient trees and quiet clearings, wolves would continue to roam, wild, free, and wise in their primeval power. And perhaps, sometimes, they would remember the man who once chose in their favor, and they would guard him as he had guarded them. 5 years later, Riverton had changed beyond recognition. From a forgotten little town, it had transformed into a popular ecotourism center. Guest cabins were built, a visitor center, and nature trails were laid out. People came here to enjoy the untouched wilderness, see wild animals in their natural habitat, and listen to stories about the forest and its creatures. Max now worked as the head forest ranger. Ranger Smith had retired and passed his position to him. Sarah headed the tourism center, and Kyle, now 14, helped his father during summer holidays, dreaming of attending forestry college after school. One warm summer evening, they sat together on the porch of their home. The sun slowly set below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery red and gold hues. Birdsong drifted from the forest. "You know," Max said thoughtfully, gazing at the sunset, "sometimes I wonder how our lives would have changed if not for that incident with the wolf pups. If I hadn't seen them, hadn't understood, everything would be different," Sarah nodded. "We probably would have moved away from here like many families, looked for a better life in the city." "And not found it," Max added, "because real life is here, in the forest, in nature, among all the creatures with whom we share this earth." Suddenly, a wolf howl echoed from the forest, solitary, drawn out, full of a primal wisdom. Kyle jumped up, peering intently into the twilight. "That's Guardian!" he exclaimed. "I recognize her voice." Max smiled, not arguing. Who knew? Maybe his son was right. Maybe it truly was the same she-wolf that had saved his life on that cold winter night. The howl repeated, joined by other voices, a whole chorus of wolf calls weaving into a melody as ancient as the earth itself. "They're singing for us," Sarah said softly, "thanking us." "Or just living their lives," Max shrugged, "and allowing us to be a small part of it." Kyle sat enchanted, listening to the wolf chorus. His face held an expression of deep understanding, as if he grasped some message in those sounds inaccessible to adults. Max placed a hand on his son's shoulder, and the three of them listened to the voices of the forest, feeling themselves part of something larger than themselves, part of the great cycle of life, where there was no place for cruelty, where mutual respect and understanding reigned, and somewhere out there, deep in the forest, in the light of the full moon, gray shadows glided between the trees, free, wild, and wise, like the very nature of which they were a part. And perhaps, sometimes, they remembered the man who once chose in their favor and guarded him as he had guarded them. Thanks for watching. What do you think of this story? Please share your thoughts. Your comments are very valuable to us.